Hello, everyone. Welcome to the March 12th edition of the Scientific Governance and Risk meeting. My name is Richard Brown. I am the head of community development at MakerDAO and also the interim governance facilitator. Let's get some context because today is going to be a spicy day and probably fairly chaotic. And so the idea is that we had a few different presentations scheduled. We're going to talk about collateral onboarding. We're going to talk about collateral risk. But there's been some emerging developments in the market that some of the people on this call might be familiar with. And so there's a question to be answered here. Obviously at Maker, well, in the ecosystem in general, it's all hands on deck. And so everybody who has responsibilities, which is all of us, are aggressively pursuing those responsibilities right now. And so the decision was, do we have a call or do we cancel the call? And it's my preference to continue to have these calls no matter what, even if we don't know precisely what it is we're going to talk about or what's going on in the world around us. So I think that what we're going to do today is sort of a YOLO themed call where we will kind of watch the situation develop as a group. And be able to offer moral support and information as required, and maybe just discuss some emerging trends. If it turns out that there's also an appetite for just like, let's get back to business as usual, I'm entirely open to that as well. I'll leave it up to the community to decide, but please be prepared for us, our foundation members and or, there's lots of super important, super busy people on this call to drop in and drop out during the course of the next hour or so. But like I said, I prefer communication as opposed to silence. So that's kind of the context here. So I'm willing to take suggestions or hear ideas, or maybe we can just chit chat and see what's going on.
Does someone want to like summarize what's going on first, or what's happened?
Well, yeah, I would love to, but I caution this all the time that I'm not the smartest person when it comes to deep financial thinking. Oh, but Kurt's here. Let's get Kurt to explain everything to us. So yeah, anybody who's willing to jump in and give their perspectives on what they think is going on right now, I would dearly love to hear from it.
I could probably give a little summary too.
Sure. I just want to caution something though. If you're a foundation member, let's not make any speculation. So just let's stick to exactly what we know is happening, and we'll leave the freedom to speculate to the community, I think, in this situation.
Yeah, so yeah, it's hard to differentiate. What happened this morning was that there was a 30% drop in the Ethereum market. That's a fact. The oracles were not able to get their price updates through because the network gas price has gone well over 100 Gwei. That has been resolved as far as I can tell. The oracles are now updating. That did kick off a bunch of collateral auctions, and now this may be speculation. We either do not have makers bidding on it, or the keepers bidding, or the keepers that are available are not able to get their transactions through because of high gas prices. And what's happening is there is one keeper that's putting in effectively zero or very low ball bids on these auctions at 300 Gwei gas. So those are getting through, but no counter bids are happening against those. The system is now in negative surplus. There is a delay on minting new Maker to recapitalize that for 2 days.
Quick question.
And yeah, David.
For the auctions that are going with zero bids, do they go through that 3-day period where people could still add bids to them, or are they like, do they close at zero bid? Because I remember there being some sort of delay on just the regular
Kurt, do you know the answer
auctions.
to that one? As far as I know, they're wrapped up after 15 minutes if there aren't any other bids.
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Okay, cool. Yeah, just wanted to clarify my understanding.
It's
Got
10
it.
minutes is the TTL on a bid.
Got it.
Is zero actually a valid bid then? Like,
Yes, it is. Some guys getting a lot of ETH for free.
Okay,
And in that case,
that's not great.
so in that case, the person whose position got liquidated essentially gets no collateral in return, and their position is under collateralized, right?
Well, their position was already under collateralized. What it is
Right.
is they don't get any amount back that they in principle should have if the markets were operating efficiently. Like you always expect to lose something on a liquidation, but now currently, at least for these ones that are won with the 0 bids, they're losing everything.
Got it.
So yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Like I said, this is going to be a YOLO meeting, and there's two things that could happen. There could be furious debates and questions and all the rest of it, and plenty of activity, or there could be uncomfortable silences, and we all know how much I love those. But there's still things that we can do. There's regularly scheduled segments that we can dip into. I know that the collateral team or the collateral onboarding team has some stuff they want to talk about. There's also pretty much has some interesting information that he can share with us as well. So maybe we can mix it up a bit. One for Wisdom pointing out that maybe everybody is experiencing PTSD right now. We could get both things happening. Sorry, I got distracted as well. So maybe Primoz, did you want to talk a bit about the information that you'd me about, and then we can alternate back and forth.
I won't be long though, but sure. Okay. So migration, it's actually, there's a bright spot in the last few days. Migration is actually doing much better than the recent few weeks. Last few weeks, size supply was pretty stable. In fact, it even increased about a week ago. There was some SAI minting, but we haven't seen any repayments. And then 3 days ago, we've been noticing some drops in size supply, some larger CDP repayments. So now the size supply is about 20 million, which is, I think, 1.5 million lower than it was just a week ago. As I said before, it was mostly flat, and this decrease came mostly from few larger CDPs migrating. Why did this happen? I'm having this theory that before CDPs were mostly defending their collateralization ratio by depositing additional Ether, and they clearly didn't want to repay their debt because they would need to pay fees. Some of them weren't willing to do that. But then as Ether, started to really started to dump heavily, some of them possibly just capitulated and they just said, okay, I'm migrating to MCD because when I'm in MCD, I can finally get out, close my position. So I'm guessing that actually the falling Ether price forced them to make this migration because it somehow coincides with the recent drop in the last day or two. So here I have some charts. This is the chart of how many CDPs migrate over time. Clearly there was a drop a week ago and then 2 weeks ago also. And then it picked up, still only about 5 to 10 CDPs migrating per day, but there was an increase in the last few days. And here is a breakdown. So we can see that about 1.5 million was repaid fully. This was mostly due to 3 larger CDPs doing repayment and migration, 64 in total, and about 80,000 SAI fees paid in Maker. This was mostly yesterday and 2 days ago, something today. And then we had some regular payments, smaller ones. What's also notable is we had quite a lot of mints. This is for last 2 weeks, by the way. And I'm guessing that this minting activity is coming from either keepers because there were some liquidations as well and they needed side liquidity, or I was also seeing some users just still using SCD like normally, and the number is not that low actually. What else? Yeah, the other thing is the current drop in price. I've noticed that there's a lot of CDPs who will get or who are getting liquidated at the moment. There were bites, but the auction it's still not closed. So this is the amount. If this gets closed, we can expect some penalty fees collected. So ideally, the maker should actually get more fees than just from the stability fee sold, because the penalty fee is actually higher than most of the fees these CDPs owe. So in net, it's actually a positive outcome as it seems currently. And that's basically it. And here you can see how many CDPs in SCD are actually below the liquidation ratio, but are still not getting liquidated. That's pretty much all I had to show.
All right, thanks, Primoz. Where are we? Is there a trustable resource to track the debt of SCD and MCD rate systems right now?
The debt of the SCD is actually here. It's this one.
And the health of just the general health of the vaults.
Oh, sizestats.com. Here we have the collateralization ratio. It's not actually.
Just thinking of something a bit more detailed. Is MakerScan up to date right now?
MakerScan, here we have, but only for top 100 positions. Yeah. So for other ones, you would need to go, we need to look at them. And then there's, of course, MakerTools, right? So it's also that. All this data that I'm getting is, by the way, from MakerTools. So here we can see SCD CDPs who are below liquidation ratio currently, still not liquidated.
Yeah. All right, that's interesting. So it looks like the conversation in the sidebar has spiked up again. It seems like auctions, basically, from my perspective.
Yeah, we should
previously is completely uneducated.
We should do a quick recap of how the debt auctions work.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go. Like, let's establish some context. You want to take that away, Sarah?
Yeah, sure. So, the debt auctions have a delay built in, so they won't trigger for 48 hours from the beginning of the liquidation of the vault. So, I think the liquidation started earlier this morning. Maybe like sometime in the past 4 or 5 hours. So say in a little less than 2 days, the debt auctions will kick in. The issue of the zero bids that we're seeing in the collateral flip auctions does not apply to the debt auctions because they're structured a little bit differently. So currently it's set up as follows. The parameter is set to, the parameter for MKR lot size is 250 and the bid amount is 50,000 DAI. So basically it will attempt to offer the market 250 MKR at a cost of 50,000 DAI, which translates into a price of 200. And it can be thought of as the minimum price that needs to be bid on for MKRs is $200. If that auction does not clear, then it will reinitialize at 20% higher or 20% lower. So, right, so 160 roughly is where the auction will reinitialize, and it'll keep dropping the price by about 20% until it finally does clear.
How long does that periods last? Periods during which nothing has to happen for it to reduce in price?
It is 3 days. That's the tau, which is the the max auction length. So the auction will run for, so if no one wants to bid 200, it'll run for 3 days before reinitializing it at 20% lower price. So now what's interesting is that governance has the option to, if they wanted to tinker with these parameters before they kick off. This might be, so the trade-off here is if governance does not want to mint MKR at too quick a rate, then they could set the parameters so that the auctions clear more slowly over a period of time, at the trade-off of having bad debt sit in the queue for however long that may be. So initially, I think that the two-day delay that we're currently experiencing was for a variety of reasons. One was, I think the main was just to give the collateral auction time to finish, because you don't want to trigger the debt auction before the collateral auction begins, which obviously wasn't not something we had to worry about in this case, unfortunately. But additionally, that debt auction does give people or keepers time to get their bearings, figure out what kind of price they would want to bid for MKR. The debt auctions probably have significantly different game theory mechanics than the collateral auctions, because there's obviously there's no easy way to just arbitrage out the debt auctions like you could with the collateral auctions. This leads to a little bit of uncertainty on what the clearing price might be, and for whatever reason it could be a good idea to deliberately spread them out over time, at the trade-off of having the debt sit there in the system. I think that could be, so I think classically, like the optics of having the debt sit there for an extended period of time might be not desirable, but given that this is kind of primarily a kind of, I'd say, a protocol issue at the Ethereum layer in terms of like the gas prices and the auctions, it might be, the community might find it acceptable to lengthen that out, knowing that the bad debt will eventually be cleared out.
Thanks, Cyrus. We've also had a discussion in the smart contracts team about preparing one or several spells, maybe out of band, to change some numbers as a result of this. Some things to consider would be lowering the ETH line. Right now, we're down to, I think, 101 million the last I saw.
Right.
Raise the debt surplus, the system surplus, which wouldn't really help us right now, but as the system recapitalizes, it'll give us a little more padding for black swan events like this in the future. And then possibly lowering the ETH stability fee because we're above peg, and lowering the DSR to a wider band to help recapitalize the system. And I don't know how to propose that. That's a governance call. So.
Sorry, what was that last one you mentioned again?
Lowering the ETH stability fee and also lowering the DSR potentially out of the current range. Right now, the last poll was for a 1% spread, but we've talked about it. I mean, we've got a pretty solid justification for going to a 0% DSR fee right now until the system's recapitalized. But that's something that's out of the hands of the smart contracts team. We can code it. We just need to make sure that that'll pass governance.
Yeah, I think certainly, I mean, of the ones you listed, the debt ceiling for ETH is probably most significant. We were fortunate that we didn't hit any OSM risk on the drop, although it was certainly closer than we would have liked. So I think right now there's like a 50 million empty buffer in the ETH debt ceiling. I would hope that would be lowered immediately. In terms of the stability fee in the DSR, I think that's up for discussion.
Also consider using this time to raise the surplus buffer. Right now it's at 500,000, which I think was maybe an arbitrary number. Now that we've got some real world experience of what a market drop looks like, it might be a good time to raise that.
Yeah, I mean, also there's a comment in the sidebar. I mean, the surplus buffer had the, if I'm not mistaken, had the entire into the surplus buffer since launch. It would not have accrued. It would still not have accrued enough to cover this this bad debt that we're currently experiencing. But yeah, that's definitely something that ironically was going to be the subject of this week and next week's presentations from the risk team.
Should we also talk about how the auction mechanics should change in the future for the debt auctions?
Well, we don't currently have any issues with the debt auction, or at least nothing, unless I'm missing something.
The
Is there a
issue,
particular issue that we're facing?
Sorry, the collateral auction.
Right. The collateral auction issue is something that, unfortunately, I think we're going to have to wait to see what the postmortem looks like on exactly what the issues were before we can discuss what changes may need to be made to the collateral auction parameters.
the biggest issue with the collateral auctions right now is that even if you try to make a change to them, you're waiting 24 hours.
Wait, sorry, how long was it that you're waiting?
You,
24 hours due to the GSM.
Right. So I interpret the question as what are some medium to long-term changes we could make to the collateral auction to help fix this. But in the short term, there's nothing we can do because of the GSM. There's a 24-hour delay on any changes there.
that's definitely a conversation we should have. And you know, we could even get into it today. But we should try to prioritize a little bit what are the most critical issues to solve and what can we do about them immediately.
Is the most immediate beneficial thing that I guess like we could start doing would be to participate in the auctions? Like we as a member of the community would be to start participating in the auctions?
Absolutely. The more keepers that we've got online, the better. This is venturing to speculation, but it's possible that some of the keepers that were online ran out of liquidity because of the number of auctions.
Yeah, so right now these auctions that are being won with 0 bids are having 2 horrific effects. One is every one of those auctions that's won with a 0 bid, 100% of the debt from that auction becomes system debt and increases how much is going to be going out in flop auctions over the coming days. The number 2 thing is every time one of those 0 bids goes through, the poor CDP holder that got liquidated, they get nothing back. They lose all of their ETH. You know, even if they got liquidated at say 130% collateralization ratio, you know, normally with the liquidation penalty, okay, you'd expect to get, you know, some fraction of your ETH back. But in this case, they're getting nothing back. And the system has no recourse to recompensate them in any way at any point for that. You know, MKR holders could discuss doing some sort of, you know, refund for those CDP holders who got screwed, but that's a conversation, you know, for all the MKR holders to have. Right now, those CDP holders are just getting annihilated.
Yeah, I would like to add that I think this is a fairly serious point. As soon as like vault holders become aware of this, that they could lose everything, like there may be a lot of positions closing.
Yeah, which is going to start a run on die, isn't it?
and combine that with how congested the network is right now and how high gas prices are, it's hard to even like say get a transaction through to either reinforce your CDP or close it right now.
Should we consider emergency shutdown?
Well, I'm not going to be the one who says we should or shouldn't because I don't have any MKR to vote with, but yeah, if people want to consider that, now would be the time.
What are the incremental pieces that you could fix to get this? What is the exact item that needs to be fixed to cause it to, I guess, solve the issue? Because emergency shutdown is a catastrophic move. And the question is this a catastrophic issue? And if it's just a critical issue, what needs to be fixed to get voted on to deploy it tomorrow?
I don't have the authority to say whether it's critical or catastrophic, but what we do need, I think more than anything, is to get keepers online and purchasing auctions.
So to what extent is this an issue of lack of keepers versus just the auction format in general as it relates to, I guess, Ethereum protocol?
My read is that it's mostly a problem of either lack of keepers or lack of liquidity for keepers to bid. And also there's this one keeper who basically has this huge lead on everyone else because they have a huge amount of capital built up from winning all these auctions. And if some other keeper does try to compete with them, this keeper can outbid them.
Yeah, he can
Yeah,
just,
this guy's probably already got at least 10,000 Ethereum from this.
he can just bully them out, and because of the gas price, all the other keepers that are trying to do the right thing are gonna like lose a bunch of ETH.
Well, I mean, the only thing they can do is outbid, which is good for Maker. The problem is when they're getting away with the zero bids.
But the problem is that the other keepers aren't incentivized to do that if they know he's just going to outbid them. Because they're just going to be paying like gas prices for like nothing, right?
I don't think that this is just like a protocol problem with Ethereum. Like I think that this could be solved with a different type of auction. I think the problem is that you have to submit a bid at the time of liquidation. And I don't think that that is necessary. Like there could be some model where collateral is being auctioned and people have already pre-registered bids at some percentage below a market rate. So they could say, I'm willing to purchase 10,000 DAI worth of Ethereum at 2% below market, but I'd be willing to purchase 20,000 DAI worth of Ethereum at 3% or 30,000 DAI worth of Ethereum at 4% below market. And they could effectively stack liquidity relative to the market price that the collateral is being auctioned. And they could do this in advance. And that could just like sit waiting for collateral to be auctioned. And then we don't have to submit transactions at the time of the auction. And that could avoid this problem in the future if gas prices get high.
That's essentially setting up a market maker order book. I like it. That's going to be a longer term
that's like
modification though.
3-month engineering project there.
Yeah.
Taking a step back, ETH price has stabilized. So at some point, liquidations, and of course this is banking that ETH price doesn't take another nosedive, but with the price stabilized, at some point liquidations will stop and the bleeding will stop, right? The keeper who's bidding zero can't hurt us if there's nothing to bid on. But I'm not it's not clear to me how long this will take to burn itself out or how big the damage will be when it's over. And that's again, assuming that, some big market move doesn't happen and ETH price goes down again.
So forgive the ignorance on the smart contract side, but how hard would something like a fix being that it can't be zero and it has to be greater than half of the most recent Oracle price? Something that would inhibit it from being zero, but yet still allow there to be something that gives incentives for arbitrage and thereby keepers to bid on it. I don't know how hard that would be to code or implement.
something like that could be pushed out fairly quickly. With, you know, within a
And
day
then
or
it would have a 24-hour delay.
yeah. I mean, it would certainly be an intermediate response where it wouldn't help us with the crisis that we're currently in the middle of. But if there were, you know, we could certainly push out a change, say within the next couple of days. And then if ETH price crashes 5 days from now, we're at least more ready. The system takes less of a beating.
Could definitely stop it from getting too much worse, or at least lots worse.
Well, to me, I mean, while that's not desirable to implement what I just recommended or suggested, I mean, it's, to me, that's still a far better step than the emergency shutdown, which just stops everything. So, Rich, I know you don't like having discussions or decisions made on calls, and you prefer it to be in forums, but in the absence of being able to type as fast as I can talk, that's my recommendation.
Well, obviously, this is an unusual situation, so it's important that people just speak their minds and figure out what it is that they want to do. There's some questions that need to be discussed as well about. We've talked about technical emergencies and expediting decision-making process or the governance process around those, and I think that there's a discussion to be had about monetary policy emergencies and what that looks like, and expediency, I guess. And maybe Long for Wisdom, you, as the resident process expert, you can weigh in on this. But I think that obviously it's still very early in the day, but we have a vote coming up tomorrow, and so there might be some decisions that need to be made about what's going to be in that executive based on the world as it exists right now. Possibly the risk team would want to weigh in on that at some point.
So useless opinion here, but I am going to buy just heaps of cheap Maker, and it's going to be great.
It's good you're helping recapitalize the system.
Well, what's cool is that this is a great stress test, and I think ultimately, like being a believer in the resiliency of systems and how they get better through experiences like this, I am still pretty hopeful in general. But yeah.
Yeah, I will not discourage anyone from setting up a keeper and buying cheap anything from our auctions.
That's a discussion that's been raised a couple times. Here's me as the average Joe on the street, the crypto Joe on the street. I've looked at the keeper docs and I can't make heads or tail of it. So how much of you know, procedural, cognitive, I don't know, technical overhead is it required to get these things set up? Do we have resources that could quickly onboard new people into this system, or do we just point them at the docs and say, like, now's the time to do it? But do we have does anybody have any ideas about how we can encourage some rapid uptick in the number of keepers we have in the system right now?
Maybe less an idea, but I do want to kind of pile on to that, because like I was looking through the keeper docs and I have looked through them before. I agree it is somewhat complicated. So I do think the narrative, like near the launch of MCD around keepers was, and also like near the end of SCD, that the keepers were going to be this hyper optimized, like extremely complex process where people were going to create their own versions of the keepers that were, you know, the most efficient, and that was going to essentially outcompete anyone that tried to come in and, you know, fork the code base and create their own. But I mean, we're looking at a situation where the problem was not enough keepers, not enough people engaging in liquidations and running these things. So to the extent that someone can come in and help bootstrap making these things a little more accessible, I think that would be extremely economically important for the system, because one point, and to kind of again pile on to what David was saying, is that this is an important but expensive lesson in just how important
the liquidation mechanic is for securing people's funds on the system. And that was true of SCD for different reasons in terms of clearing out bad debt being an important narrative. But now with auction mechanics, it's even more so important because the ability to lose money is so much faster and more immediate in the auction-based system if there's not a really robust ecosystem of liquidators. So I think from my experience, it was a little complicated to look at and try and figure out and try to run one, obviously. To the extent somebody can help make that more accessible for everyone, I think that would be a no regret. I mean, the SCD system had a button where you could liquidate, like the, you know, I'm not saying somebody necessarily needs to build that, but working towards a slightly easier solution, I think is a really good idea.
So I think let's split that. The discussion really is that we don't like the fact that having a price of 0 is horrible, right? There should be market incentives. It should be a market mechanism that keeps people wanting to do keepers. But we need to make sure there's a floor on the price. And thus far, the price had been 0, which is why I suggested 50%. Just something that is not catastrophic of 0, but yet still provides plenty of incentive. Maybe it's 80%, maybe it's 50%. I don't care the number, but something. But it's like you mentioned, and I agree with wholeheartedly, it's a very painful but important lesson.
If I can chime in, I'm one of the guys with Grapefruit Trading. We do a lot of DeFi stuff in this space, and we aren't running a keeper for the primary reason that the docs were just not that helpful, and we had a lot of other stuff to deal with. And I think a big priority going forward should be getting those things to be more understandable and more clear and crisp exactly as to what we're doing. And we would definitely be more than happy to get that underway right away.
Well, how right away? As in today, right away? Should we put you in contact with somebody?
Yeah, I'd be happy to start trying to hammer out something right now.
All right. Who do we have? Who's the keeper expert from the foundation? In the call right now?
Ed Nopal, but I don't know if he's on the call right now. Ed's usually on these calls.
Most of the foundation's keeper experts are currently frantically trying to respond to the issue.
Yeah, we have a team of like 5 or so that are working on that. The most recent update was a couple minutes ago. Chris Mooney said they almost have another keeper up. So probably until that happens, we won't see them.
Cool, but let's not lose the thread. So market makers are going to be key, I think, for the contingency planning situation. So Kurt or Andy, if somebody can get with Grapefruit and see it maybe offline or in a DM, just to see if there's something we can do to get them started.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Because, well, like, not to be mercenary about it, but there's obviously a profit opportunity that is occurring right now as well. So it's time to pile in if it's going to happen.
How are we going to decide like what we're actually doing in terms of like spells and or shutdown and or anything else? We need to figure that out, I guess.
Yeah, I think that, well, it's obvious, like I touched on this earlier, but like this is, we're like an hour or two into, or whatever, of trying to gather all the threads, come up with all the plans, getting all the domain experts into different rooms and coming up with some kind of cohesive plan about what happens. So the situation is going to develop through the course of the day, and we're not going to get clarity by the time the end of this call happens. But there's communication that's starting. We're going to be, the foundation will be starting a tweet thread in a minute if that hasn't happened already. There's going to be a forum thread that I'm going to kick off, and I have been trying to in another window while we've been chatting to keep a central thread going so everybody can track what's going on. And then we need to sort out what some of these plans are, whether it's additional keepers, whether it's some spells that are held in reserve, or whether there's going to be a recommendation from the risk team about some monetary policy that can be put into effect for tomorrow's executive. So I think that now in this forum is just about throwing ideas on the table and making sure that no stone has been unturned, and then continuing the conversation in the forum afterwards.
Do we want to talk about how bad it needs to get before we call shutdown then? Because that kind of got mentioned on the sidebar, but we haven't really discussed that. Like, do we want to say, like, you know, if it gets to like neg 20 mil debt or something, that we call it, or neg 10 mil, or do we not want to say?
Yeah, well, maybe we
specific
can hear
number?
from Risk about some ideas or people that are in that space. Like, I don't know what are the thresholds here? Is it the peg deviation? Is it the system debt? Is there technical considerations that should be prioritized? I'm not sure.
I don't think there's any official mandate, as far as I know, of a specific threshold or event to trigger emergency shutdown. Right? It's at governance's discretion. I mean, maybe some rules of thumb that could be used is the emergency shutdown more or less harmful. Trying to do a flop auction for let's say 20 million. Obviously if it's not that high, but I think for reasonable amounts, then no, I mean, just personally, I would say that the flop auction is more desirable because it means that DAI would still be fully backed, and I think
I'm more concerned about like the vault holders, right, at this stage, because you're gonna get liquidated and get like nothing back, and as like Sam mentioned earlier, like once they become aware of that, like they're all gonna try and leave as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I just closed my position for that exact reason.
Yeah. So Frank was saying that's the risk you take when you borrow, and that's true. But like we also said, like it's kind of presented as a 13%, like all of it.
What's the beauty of severe downward jumps in price? Did I say beauty? I meant tragedy.
But from the other side of the perspective, just for the moment, kind of for the record, what is, for the owner of for people who are DAI holders, what does this mean for the average user?
I still see my DSR balances going up.
The DAI price on CoinGecko is currently $1.04, so we're still above peg for DAI holders.
Yeah.
Right, but this issue we're
I
talking
mean, the
about
price,
is
hold on, so just
explicitly
to,
related. Sorry, Vishesh, just 2 seconds. This price thing, the defect issue we're talking about is primarily related to if you have a vault or a CDP and it's the collateral issue against it. But DAI holders in the ecosystem outside of that, this is unrelated to anything to touch on DAI, rather the collateral, correct?
I think, yes, the DAI holders should not receive any losses due to this. This is entirely on vault holders and maker holders.
Unless there's like more drops and we can't like recapitalize with. Like there's not that much.
Should we,
right?
should we take a moment to talk about price? Because I think that's something people are, I've heard this multiple times in the last few minutes, the $1.04 thing. So just to clarify, if you look at like order books, DYDX, for example, DAI does sort of run up with a few trades and then comes right back down, gets arbed a little over $1.02. A lot of these trades have been executing like $1.19, $1.25, just sort of this morning. So it doesn't seem to be like running up unbounded. It's certainly elevated right now. There's no reason that shouldn't regulate itself down. I mean, if the DAI price like starts running up to $1.03, $1.04, I do reasonably expect arbitrage to come in and mint more and sell it and make a profit. I mean, that appears to be happening right now, is when the price does try to run up much higher, people do sort of start selling from somewhere, and I can start checking the mint transactions to see if people are minting more to sell. But it's fully my expectation that it wouldn't run up just completely unbounded.
Are people still going to be willing to mint though, to like arbitrage if they know that like the liquidation doesn't work? Right,
Depends on how
the
many
price,
people go to buy DAI to go close out their vaults or CDPs.
the price of ETH has also leveled off since the drop this morning, so there may be people willing to take that risk that it will stay level or go up.
I'm curious about people's views on how this should affect MKR voters' stance on what the stability fee should be, and the DSR spread for that matter.
Well, David, that was kind of my point. Is this is a short-term effect that has to do with obviously insane liquidation activity, but also just a crazy drop in ETH price in the first place. So adjusting the stability fee, for example, like that's such a time to propagate through the system in terms of reducing the profitability of people to mint more DAI. Like I don't think that if you dropped the stability fee right now that you're going to incentivize a ton more people to mint more DAI and sell
Right.
it to reduce the DAI price. Like that's a longer term lever, and that's just like something that I've harped on multiple times. I don't think you're going to be able to use that to short term bring DAI down from $1 to $1.
Got it.
even if it's not like in order to fix the short-term instability, like, do we not want to consider bringing it down anyway? Like, the way things are looking at the moment, it seems more likely that things are going to get worse before they get better in terms of like the wider economy. So like, do we want to start adjusting for that?
But doesn't that imply like a wait and see kind of deal?
Well, maybe. I mean, the thing is, like, if there's just like price action after price action after price action, and each of them are like short term, but like they're all downwards, then like we're in like a long term price action, right? Like.
So long, I want to address that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good point to bring up because a lot of people are going to think the same thing, I think. So you got to answer it. What I would actually be more concerned about is if in the short term, DAI price regulates itself back down closer to $1, and then ETH is what people are sort of considering to be, very cheap. And then you have sort of a surge of bullish activity and leverage being issued in the event that ETH stabilizes or starts going back up. And you actually have now set up for the future a situation where the peg is risky from the lower direction. And that's actually what I'm like from a monetary policy standpoint. I think the stability fee is primarily about managing risk of the DAI peg drifting below. It's not about bringing the DAI peg down from above. That is primarily an arbitrage mechanism. So I do think that your biggest risk is actually reacting to this in a way that you set yourself up for a future problem after things level out.
Maybe I think it's like kind of dependent on like what happens, right? Like if we bring it down now, and as you say, if ETH then starts looking more bullish, then yeah, it's going to incentivize a bunch more people to go long, and we're going to end up with the peg dropping lower. But like if in the future, instead of ETH stabilizing and going up, it goes down further, then we're in like an even worse position. So like, yeah, it's difficult to say like what is the best thing to do, and I guess like when we don't know what's going to happen, right?
There was also a good question about that in the chat. So, in terms of liquidity crunch, the stability fee doesn't fix a liquidity crunch. And I really doubt that there's a lot of system participants that are sitting there saying, hey, I'm not going to engage in short-term arbitrage because there's a long-term cost associated with it. Stability fee is primarily an over-time cost. In terms of short-term trades, it doesn't make a huge difference, I think, on people's decision-making processes.
Yeah, that's fair.
Just to try to understand the run up in price. So Vishesh, I wanted to bounce this off you just to confirm that I'm understanding this. I think what happened was as the price of ETH dropped, other fiat books dried up on some exchanges, and then people started buying into, I guess like buying into ETH DAI, and then started to run the price of ETH DAI up. And I think the price of DAI USD went up because there were arbitrageurs that were arbitraging across some like FUSD, FDAI, and DAI USD books. So this caused like net DAI books to go up, right? Because like if ETH is dropping, you wouldn't expect there to be a surplus on USD DAI unless somebody's arbitraging USD DAI across some other DAI book. So like FDAI, and FDAI, there was a surplus on FDAI because other Ethereum books were drying up, right? Like FUSD dried up as people were selling to exit their positions.
I could see that. I mean, I obviously I'm not 100% certain, but I could see that being a reasonable impact. The other thing that I think contributes is as you have a lot of these liquidations occurring, you know, zero price notwithstanding, people would be sourcing DAI in order to engage in liquidations, pay down positions, etc. I mean, this is just like a general long-term pattern of when ETH price is crashing, DAI price tends to run up. And that's something that we've seen in the past before. So as far as that being exacerbated by other trading pairs for ETH drying up, like possible for sure. I couldn't say, I didn't check.
Cool. Yeah, thank you.
Someone also asked in the Maker Rocket chat about the SI price graph. So I also pulled the SI trading data. It's basically the same situation as with DAI. I mean, those things have been so well locked to each other that that's what you can reasonably expect. So volume weighted average price for the last 24 hours looks like $1.26, and then most recent trades were you know, a bit higher, around $1.04.
How worried are you about another ETH drop to like below 100? People have been talking about that in the chat.
That was kind of quiet, Mike. Can you repeat that?
Oh yeah. Sorry, people in the chat were talking about what if ETH goes below 100? If we have another drop in the issues with, like, are we gonna have the same issues in the auctions and zero DAI bid? Still can't hear me.
No, that was better.
We hear you now.
Yeah, I think it's just tough to speculate on just the ETH price. That's, I think, beyond anybody's.
But we could lose a lot of collateral, right? Like that's
yeah.
something we have to consider for vault holders.
Yeah. So I think I'm interested in seeing how the liquidity situation on the keeper side improves. But yeah, that's definitely a concern.
Yeah, it's critically important that we get more keepers online.
Like, I know you said that, like, how sure are we that that's going to help, right? Like, if this guy who is like bidding zero just like outbids everyone.
Well, you can't outbid someone if you bid zero.
No, I know, of course, but like he outbids everyone else who competes. Everyone else stops competing because they want to pay like 100 quay gas fees to get nothing back, right? And then they stop competing, and then it's just him again bidding 0, right? Like.
So I don't want to also speculate too much. Prefer to focus on things that we do know, but I was seeing someone mention like the potential that these transactions were going through at lower gas prices than other transactions, and so people were sort of questioning whether there's like a miner involved that's prioritizing their own transactions.
The ones that I was looking at this morning were going through at 300 Gwei, and the fast at the time was 115. So they were well overbidding in the gas price.
Okay.
So do we do like an DSR vote or like a stability fee vote to lower them?
Sorry, you cut out for a sec. Was that a question for me?
Yeah. I was asking for the site rewrap. So thanks for the screenshot of the graph. I just want to ask, could you put that back on DAI.decipher.io, or for example?
Sure thing. Yeah, it wasn't being used as much, I thought, so I took it off. But I can put it back on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Rich, there's actually some interesting governance discussions to be had. If we did want to go ahead and lower the stability fee and the DSR, how does this conflict with the governance poll that just ended today versus potentially setting up a new one or just jumping straight to an executive? Or there needs to be some clarity around that.
Well, yeah, you're getting revenge on me because I threw that question at you basically, and long for wisdom earlier. I don't know. This is unprecedented. So we do have precedent for emergency technical fixes, but this is like we're potentially coming into a territory where we have emergency monetary fixes, and I have no idea what that looks like, right? So we haven't discussed it. Presumably, well, I don't want to lead the conversation, so I'd love for somebody else to start jumping in there and start talking before I continue saying what I'm going to say. But like, we have a risk team that's been empowered by the governance ecosystem to be domain experts and make decisions. My assumption would be that goes along with a certain amount of authority to pull us out of the fire when they need to. So. My guess would be that risk has latitude to put in emergency executives. But long for wisdom, anybody else on the call, feel free to disagree.
I mean, I think something needs to happen, I guess, sooner rather than later. So I don't know. I don't think we should like be beholden to those polls that were on this week before this happened. But,
yeah, well, going down with the ship because of policy and procedure is probably not the best way to do it. So I think that obviously we can hash it out in the forum after the call, and this is like these ancient discussions that I'll never stop harping on. But how much debate is adequate? When do we know when consensus has been reached? What's the definition of an emergency, and who gets to decide? All these things that are ancient. Questions that need to be answered. I think that we're going to probably have to answer some today, and we'll do that in the forum.
And also, dude,
I got to. If you're muted, can you mute yourself?
I'm poor now. Actually, I'm on the call right now with Maker. There was a.
Does anybody know who that is?
It's Matt. Yeah, MATT.
Yeah, okay, I got him. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear the bad news, Matt, but I've muted you. So yeah, we need to figure that out sort of in real time. How do we handle emerging monetary policy emergencies? And forum thread. I have 3 different windows open that I'm chatting in actively right now. So if somebody else wants to go in there and start a forum thread for like Black Thursday or something, and we can start figuring out what next steps look like. But in the absence of somebody getting there before me, I think that we spend the rest of the day engaging actively in that thread, figuring out what the plans are, start collecting, like I said, all the threads of different teams that are looking into different potential solutions. We can start sorting them out, prioritizing, then figuring out, hopefully by end of day, what the executive tomorrow is going to look like. That's as much clarity as I can provide right now. I'm not sure how satisfying that is. Does that sound appropriate, Long?
Sounds reasonable. Like, I mean, yeah, we need to kind of to figure out what we're actually going to do, right? Because we haven't done that yet. So it's the first thing, and then we need to decide when we need to do it and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, so it sounds just as unsatisfying when you say it as when I said it. So yeah, we do need to figure out what to do. So there's lots of chats happening in the sidebar. And I encourage people to like start talking in this chat instead of just typing on the side. So Makerman, Aaron, Akiva, I know you guys have microphones. So if you want to jump in and add to the discussion, that'd be great. Makerman says, AS biggest concern is DAI auctions and collateral. Yep, that's a significant problem.
I think we need to have a discussion about how to make sure the MKR price doesn't go to zero during the debt auctions in 2 days.
You can be sure of that because I'm not selling mine. Is that a clear answer?
I think the solution is to make sure that we and you have keepers online ready to buy that up.
Yeah, so the discussion I'm interested in having is what is a reasonable time, what are reasonable parameters for the debt auctions so we can maximize the efficiency of the debt auction. We could, different options are, one is to just delay the start of them. So right now it's, as I mentioned, it's scheduled to start under 48 hours. That could be pushed out, or once they do begin, the auction duration could be spread out. There's kind of a number of different ways that this could go. But I think the question is, what are we trying to optimize for in terms of getting keeper interest in the flop auction?
Well,
I don't think the issue is keepers. I think
it's also mitigating the damage that's exposed by people exploiting that system, right? Or using it effectively, however you want to term the thing. So is that, it feels like that's probably going to be the mechanism, right? So risk, smart contracts teams need to aggressively coordinate today and sometime within the next few hours come up with a proposal of what an executive for tomorrow looks like, right? And then we'll discuss what that voting that in looks like. I guess the other question too is do we need to have an emergency executive today? So Akiva brought that up in the sidebar. So is it, because we still have this 24-hour delay, right? So we need to have some kind of indication of what timelines we're looking at. And if 2 days is going to be too long, maybe we need to initiate something today. Just another discussion that risk and smart contracts teams and the community should be having in the forum. I'd be interested in hearing opinions now, though. Sorry, I cut you off, Akiva. Were you going to say something?
I'm not, the keepers is an issue, but it's also an issue of, is there enough capital between all the community participants out there to buy up all this massive debt? I mean, and if there is enough community capital out there, what price is it going to buy it at? And is that really a long-term damage to the ecosystem?
What's the total amount of collateral to be liquidated? Like, is there, somewhere we could see that, there's $4 million in debt, but there's still 10 million in queue to be liquidated?
I think we could look at the collateral balance of the flip contract.
So, sorry, to jump back to the debt auction for a second. So I think the rationale for having the debt auctions run as quickly as possible is that typically there's supposed to be a lack of confidence in the DAI price if it is unbacked or if there's bad debt sitting in the queue. But I'm not getting the sense that there's any doubts in the stability of DAI, right? In fact, it's too expensive. So that's definitely an argument for lengthening out the debt auctions to help minimize the damage to, I mean, just to help the efficiency of the MKR auctions, right? Does anybody feel like there's this burning need to clear that out like ASAP, or is it something that can be handled over the course of days, or if not weeks even?
Given that there's a less risk with the flop auctions, I think it makes sense to lengthen out the collateral auctions to prevent the ability for somebody to just come in and underbid the crap out of them.
And I posted about this in the chat, but maybe there should be some effort to have some sort of underwriters where the underwriters can go search out big MKR potential buyers who can help us recapitalize.
Hey, Cyrus, so your question was, if I understood you correctly, you want us to decide if we should wait for the system depth to clear with time, or if we should print some more Maker.
This is just speculation, but if the debt was large enough that the DAI community was worried, then we might see a dip in the DAI price because there'd be fears of haircuts, right? And so there might be incentive for the governance community to clear out that debt as quickly as possible to restore confidence for the DAI price. But it doesn't appear to me that there is a lack of confidence in the DAI price, or, I mean, it's obviously hard to draw conclusions at this stage, but if that were the case, then it might be more efficient to either wait and come up with a plan, or just spread them out slowly as well, or basically just different ways of stretching it out. Right, there's some situations where the protocol probably would not operate very well with a lingering debt in the system. I'm merely speculating that this may not be one of those instances.
Well, it would definitely not hurt if something could buy us more time. So, for example, extending the duration of the auction.
I made a thread on the forum, but we can start discussing these in a more durable format. So.
Cool, thanks, Long. Can you post the thread link? Oh, you did. There you go.
I've done so already.
Yeah, thanks. You did actually call it Black Thursday. That's good.
Well, you did call it something.
Catchy. All right. Well, I don't necessarily want to stick a fork in this call because there's literally 100 people, but nobody's talking. So if you have comments or questions, please consider firing up the microphone and getting your voice heard. We'll give it a couple more minutes. And
Yeah.
I think
Another thing I wanted to talk about, talking about in the Rocket chat as well, is that there's obviously desire to lower the DSR and the stability fee to kind of help ease liquidity. Just wanted to, Vishesh points this out all the time, that it's not kind of an immediate one-to-one relationship where as soon as you lower the stability fee, it just magically makes the DAI price come
Excuse
back in
me,
line.
can I be heard?
Yes.
How about increasing DSR spread? I put it in the chat, but it wasn't put up to the discussion. DSR spread should both has the effect of so increasing it of taking DAI from DSR to the market, so increasing liquidity. Also, it would help to recapitalize the system, to decrease the level of bad debt. So maybe that's what risks do you see, especially if DAI is above the peg, of doing so? I view this as possible to do really fast and not bearing much risks with it. So what is your opinion on that?
I agree with Adam. Yeah, I think that sounds like a good idea. I think that was anonymous, or maybe it was Adam. Like worst case is if we set it to if we set it like 0 and then like a whole bunch of DAI floods like the market and we go below peg, right? That's kind of but we're above peg as it is. So.
And also would recapitalize or help to decrease the bad debt.
Yeah, it should do, because we're not paying out. We're then not paying out the stability fee to DAI holders.
I mean, in theory, if the entire community was okay with the bad debt, then it could just be indefinitely postponed until just stability fees keep accruing until the bad debt is cleared out. That's technically an option as well. There's one might say that you'd only want to you'd want to run the debt auction if it was affecting the DAI price directly. Otherwise, just let it slowly get recapitalized through the stability fees.
Also, all these auctions, putting aside the problem of 0 bits, if let's say that start working right, then actually all these auctions further decrease the liquidity and increase the DAI price above the peg. So we also should have some mechanics to flash some additional DAI to the market. So decreasing DSR helps with that.
Yeah, so I saw a post by Vishesh saying that time is not, what did you write, Vishesh? I was wondering if you can comment more on that. Time is the enemy. Is there any way you can make a comment on what you wrote there?
I can, but sorry for the background noise. So what I was just talking about was with the duration of the auctions, Cyrus's earlier proposal about lengthening those time periods. I do think the risk right now is something happening too quickly, people coming in underbidding, with a 0 price, etc. You're not having enough time for other liquidators to come in and successfully bid at more reasonable prices. and then you're losing potentially more money. That's what I mean by timing.
Got it. So you're okay with the system that, in your opinion, staggering along and letting time play itself, and hopefully bringing that down. Are you okay with that?
I mean, you got to have a conversation about numbers at that point, like what the exact parameters are. But I mean, that's, I guess, more Cyrus's wheelhouse.
Sorry, what was the question?
Just about the duration of the auctions.
And specifically, what was the question?
Like there are trade-offs there, but the trade-offs are dependent on like what exactly you choose as the values for those parameters. So it sounds like there's some appetite for having a more granular discussion about what those values are. That was kind of my point.
Right. I think that the issue we're experiencing with the zero bids is just somewhat outside what reasonable auction parameters might even be. I mean, this is like, we're either running into protocol issues with the gas wars or weird liquidity issues. I mean, certainly they can be revisited. I just don't know if at this stage we have anything definitive to say about that.
So Snake in the sidebar asked how this auction problem affects Psi. My understanding is that it doesn't, although there is like another problem with Psi, in that if Psi is above $1.03, then things get a little bit weird. That's kind of a separate issue. All right, so all the things that people have suggested, including like risk and foundation people, can you please post them in the thread on the forums so that we can start like figuring out what all the options are and like voting on them, I guess, if we want to include them in an executive. I think that'd be useful. Also, if someone wants to do like a write-up, like a sort of couple of paragraphs of what's going on, that'll be also good, because then I can put that in the forum. But who haven't had a chance to be here or follow the chat will know what's going on.
Yeah, I wanted to second that. Obviously, the situation is rapidly developing. And like I said earlier, numerous times, if people are still pulling all the threads together, there's different groups of domain experts coming up with plans and contingencies and suggestions, and they all need to coordinate. So as clarity becomes developed, those suggestions will be posted to that forum thread, and then we'll have a clearer picture of what steps need to be taken and when, whether that's today or tomorrow, or we alter the executive. Look forward to suggestions from risk teams and smart contract teams, but we're also very, very interested in the ecosystem itself, offering up its solutions. So don't lose track of that thread. Please join us in the forums and contribute to the discussion.
One thing I'd like to say is it'd be good if we could keep that thread to like short-term like fixes only, and then like discuss the longer-term things we're going to change.
Yeah, we're gonna have to. I think we're gonna have to moderate that one slightly. Well, depending on the level of activity. But if manifestos and/or craziness pipes up, expect to be muted. Let's keep it focused on pragmatic, immediate solutions, and then we can use this as an experiment in how do we not lose the thread on these like this. If you're a regular listener and a long-time fan of these governance calls, you'll know that one of our common themes is apathy versus urgency versus denial. Well, maybe that's the pyramid that we're working with. So bad things happen, we furiously attempt to react to those bad things. Then afterwards we figure out how bad it was, and then we all get relieved that it's not bad anymore, and then we move on with our lives hoping that the bad things never happen again. And it'd be really great if this group and the ecosystem in general would stop doing that. So maybe we can come out of this thing with some lessons about the future. At the very least, we'll have a very clear understanding of how the auction system needs to be improved. Were you going to add to that one, Frozen?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I'm not so worried if there's like lots of discussion on that thread. That's fine. I'll like keep it organized and things. But yeah, again, like main focus is on like we kind of need to figure out what we want to do like immediately as soon as possible. So let's focus on those things. All the stuff like about changing how auctions work, or yeah, like anything that can be discussed later should be discussed like later. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, we're in a brave new world here. So we have our governance ecosystem. We need to achieve consensus. We need to have people join the debate. That we've also seen over the course of the last year or two that that incurs operational and cognitive and governance-related overhead. That's a slow process. If we had a dictator who would just tell us what to do, it would be so much simpler, but that's not the world we live in, happily. So we need to expedite this process and figure out how agile we can be in the face of rapidly developing events in the ecosystem. So let's use this as a good learning experience. So please join that forum thread, offer up your suggestions, look for clarity, ask piercing questions, and then we'll everybody can get together and do their best to actually have some kind of a plan in place by end of day, hopefully.
And I think a quick recap from the governance side for what we're considering is sounds like lowering of the DSR and stability fee to ease up liquidity concerns on DAI, delaying the debt auction somehow to give us more time to gather information. And then with regards to the collateral auctions, either, looking to source keeper liquidity for the collateral auctions, so no more zero bids. And then the risk there is if that doesn't happen and there's another large ETH drop, then there could be more trouble. So I think those are the three main points that I gathered from this discussion today.
All right, can you type them up and put them in the forum thread, please?
Yeah. This is just for people listening on the call.
That's cool.
Hey, Loan for Wisdom, do you have a recap of what we're voting on tomorrow as far as DSR spread and things like that?
I actually haven't checked myself. I will do so now. As I said, what we're voting on tomorrow may change depending on the outcome of this discussion. But yeah, we'll have a look. So spread adjustment. Oh, that was yes, we didn't vote on the spread adjustment. We did vote on the stability fee, which came out as 4. 4. Yeah, that's like 4% lower than it is now. Stability fee went down to 7.5% in the poll. Like not active yet, but that's what happened in the poll. And then we voted to activate the governance security module for SCD and change the migration contract to debt ceiling. Yeah. So those are the things that we called on last week.
Okay, and that 4%, did those votes come in this morning by any chance? Are you able to tell that by the breakdown of the voting? Did it come in like after, the?
Yeah, the 4% one was actually the 4% one wasn't this morning. That was like a few hours ago, I think. Yeah, it was like 4 or 5 hours ago. It went up to 4, presumably partially in response to the ETH price dropping.
Okay. How do you feel about that? Are you in favor of that 4%, or anybody else on here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. But Bishesh has a good point in that we don't like overreacting can also cause problems in the future, but like at the same time, I feel like we have problems now. So yeah, I don't know. I think we could stand to reduce it at least some. 4% is quite a big change, but then we also saw quite a big drop and quite a thing happen. So.
Cyrus, I was wondering if the foundation has like internal thresholds for emergency shutdown, and like what are there specific numbers we should be looking at for that?
I'm not aware of any such internal thresholds at all.
Cool.
There's no, I wouldn't, I just don't think that's a thing at all, any internal thresholds.
Cool.
And would anybody recommend that we help pass the DAI savings rate spread, which is at it's lacking 15,000 MKR? Would it be wise to vote for that? I was one that actually has not voted for it. Does anybody here feel like we should now vote for that DAI savings rate spread? I think it's 1% before tomorrow's vote, executive vote.
Do you know how much MKR is needed to pass that off the top of your head right now?
15,045.78.
Yeah, I mean, if MKR holders wanted to pass, they should probably vote sooner rather than later. Otherwise, they're probably going to have to wait for the next vote.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, anything
All right. Well, everybody knows how much I like the uncomfortable silence thing. It's kryptonite. I'm not sure what we should do in this situation. There's people in the call from the foundation and without that obviously need to attend to certain business-related activities. But if people are still interested in hanging out and chatting, I'm not entirely opposed to that as well. So we could leave the call up and people can, sort of monitor the situation and just sort of hang out. Or I can put an end to this and we can continue the discussion in the forum thread. I'm open for suggestions. I do have some pressing tasks I need to start attending to. Any ideas?
I would say leave the call up if you can, and then people can leave if they want, if they need to.
Great. I think that's what. Any other suggestions? It feels fine to me.
Yeah. Richard, wasn't it supposed to have like a further presentation today, or from the presentation that started last week?
Yeah, we had two sort of major presentations we wanted to get to today. Unfortunately, the people in charge of presenting those presentations are in 5 or 6 other chat windows and Google Docs at this point. And so there's more pressing issues that need to be dealt with. So,
so postponing that for next week, possibly.
Yeah, we'll be rescheduling at the very least, but just a general Q&A session. Nothing is sort of off the table. So if people wanted to hang out and just ask random questions, that's cool. I am going to stop recording though, in the interest of the sanity of the people that are in charge of transcribing these things, and so we can get that started. And potentially I'll hand off the ownership of the call to David.
Yeah, you can give it to me. I'll just have it running in the background while I do some work.
All All right, cool. It'd be interesting to see how feisty the call gets without the recording going. Remember that we're being twitched, whatever it is you kids call those things these days. So watch what you say.
By the way, anybody on Twitch, I believe that there's space to actually join the Zoom call.